Let me take you back, my friends, to a clear spring morning long ago, in the year 1672. It was the 5th day of May, and King Louis XIV of France rode quietly into the small town of Charleroi. This place lay right on the border between his kingdom and what folks then called the Spanish Netherlands. The king came there for one important reason, to look over his army. And what an army it was! 50,000 men stood ready in perfect order. Their uniforms were bright and well kept, their muskets held straight, their cannons placed neatly behind the lines. Flags moved gently in the soft breeze. Officers saluted with respect, and low drum beats carried across the field like a steady heartbeat. The whole scene felt grand, yet calm, like one of those fine old paintings you sometimes see in quiet museums, full of dignity and purpose. This was no simple gathering of soldiers. It was one of the most carefully planned and impressive military reviews of the entire 17th century. Louis wanted the world to see it clearly, his own people, his neighbors among other kings, and especially those who might ever think of standing against him. He wanted everyone to understand, without a single word, that France had grown strong once more. Only a few days after this inspection, those very same troops began their march north. They crossed the border into the Dutch Republic, moving swiftly across the flat, open lands, taking towns and strong places one by one. Before long, they drew close to Amsterdam itself, the proud heart of Dutch trade and life. Many people who lived in that time were truly amazed. Some felt pride for their country. Others felt a quiet worry because it seemed one man could change so much of Europe in such a short time. We remember Louis XIV today as the Sun King. He built the splendid Palace of Versailles, a place so large and beautiful that it became a wonder known far beyond France. He showed the world what it meant to rule as an absolute king, where all power rested in his hands alone, with no need to ask permission from nobles, or from assemblies, or from anyone else. Many admired him for this. After long years of trouble in France, civil wars over faith, powerful lords acting like little kings, weak rulers, he brought back order and pride. France stood tall again, respected by some, feared by others across the whole continent. But not everyone looked upon him with the same warm feelings. Some saw a man who reached for too much. He appeared to want control over large parts of Western Europe, always pushing forward, always starting new wars to make his borders wider. His time as king lasted 72 years, longer than any other ruler we know of in all history. When we think about such a long life, we must ask ourselves honest questions. Was his rule a true success for France and for its people? Did it bring lasting good, peace, and happiness? Or did those many wars leave behind more sorrow than joy? Wars cost lives. Young men who never returned home, families who waited in vain, towns damaged, treasuries emptied over time. These things matter deeply, especially when we remember how hard everyday life could be back then. To understand that proud day in 1672, it helps to look a little further back. Louis was born in 1638, but the real roots of his strength go even earlier. For generations, France had known difficult days. Long religious wars had divided families and towns. Powerful nobles sometimes ignored the king. Fights with Spain and Austria drained the land. Yet slowly, change came. Louis's grandfather, Henry IV, and his father, Louis XIII, began to bring more order to the center. They had wise helpers like Cardinal Richelieu, who worked hard to make the crown stronger, to gather power in Paris, to build an army that answered only to the king. By the time Louis grew to manhood, France was ready to rise. The inspection at Charleroi showed the fruit of those years of careful work. Louis held a clear dream for his country. He wanted natural borders that would keep France safe and strong. The high Pyrenees mountains in the south to hold back Spain, the tall Alps toward Italy, and above all, the wide river Rhine to the east as a firm line of protection. To reach those lines, he needed a large, well-trained, well-paid army that obeyed him alone. No more depending on nobles who might change sides, no more begging for money from groups that could refuse. So he built that army step by step, paid the soldiers fairly, trained them well, and led them with his own eyes. The day at Charleroi was clear proof his plan was working. Yet every great dream carries its own weight. The war that followed this review brought pain to many. Young Frenchmen left their farms and villages, some never came home to their families. Dutch people, facing the invasion, made a desperate choice. They broke their own dikes, let water flood their fields to slow the French advance. It saved their freedom, but ruined homes, crops, and lives for years. Louis believed these sacrifices were needed for the future greatness of France. He saw himself as chosen by God, like the sun that rises each morning to give light and warmth to the world. Other rulers watched him closely. Some tried to copy his style, building grand palaces, wearing fine clothes, ruling with a strong hand. If you are in your later years, like many who listen to these stories, you may remember tales your own grandparents shared. They spoke of leaders who promised strength after hard times, who built nations high, but whose choices sometimes brought sorrow to ordinary people. Louis was one of those leaders. He helped shape the borders we see on maps of France today. He gave his country pride and importance again. Yet he also left behind heavy debts and a way of ruling that depended so much on one man. When that man is wise and fair, things can go well. But when troubles come, such power can become fragile. As we begin this full journey through his life, let us keep our hearts open and kind. We will walk together through his childhood days, the hard moments he faced as a boy, the great things he built, and the choices that touched so many lives. We will see not just the king in grand paintings, but the man who lived a very long life, filled with dreams, family joys and sorrows, faith, and decisions that left their mark on history. What are your first thoughts as we begin? Do you see him as a builder of something wonderful, or do you feel his light sometimes cast long shadows? Share if you wish. We have a long road ahead, and it is always better when we travel it together. Let us step back a little further now, to a quiet autumn day in the year 1638, when a new life began that would one day change the course of France. On the 5th of September, in the royal palace of Château de Saint-Germain-en-Laye, just west of Paris, a baby boy was born to King Louis XIII and Queen Anne of Austria. They named him Louis, the 14th of that name in French history. From the moment he drew his first breath, he was part of a long and proud line of kings, the House of Bourbon, a family that had come to power only a few decades earlier. His grandfather, Henry IV, had ended terrible religious wars, and his father, Louis XIII, had worked hard to make the crown stronger. Little did anyone know, this child would carry that legacy farther than any before him and rule longer than any king in all of known history. The palace where he was born was a beautiful place, with gardens and wide halls, a peaceful spot away from the busy streets of Paris. His mother, Anne, had waited many years for a healthy child. She had suffered several losses, miscarriages that must have broken her heart, and many thought she would never have a son. Yet, after 23 years of marriage, Louis arrived safe and strong. 2 years later, in 1640, a second son came, Philippe, Duke of Orleans. The royal family was complete, and France had its heirs. In those days, royal births were celebrated with bells ringing across the land, cannons firing salutes, and people gathering to wish the child well. It was a moment of hope after so many years of uncertainty. To understand this baby boy, we must look at his family roots. His father, Louis XIII, had become king at only 8 years old after his own father, Henry IV, was killed by an assassin in 1610. Henry IV had been a great king, a man who ended the French wars of religion by converting to Catholicism and saying those famous words, "Paris is well worth a mass." He brought peace and started the Bourbon line that would last for generations. Louis XIII, though quieter and more serious, carried on that work with the help of Cardinal Richelieu, a powerful minister who strengthened the kingdom against its enemies. His mother, Anne of Austria, came from the great Habsburg family of Spain. Her father was King Philip III of Spain, and her marriage to Louis XIII in 1615 was meant to keep peace between France and Spain. Those royal marriages were common in those days, ways to avoid war through family ties, though they often did not work as hoped. Anne was a kind woman, quiet, pious, and charitable, but the early years of her marriage were hard, with no children, and tensions at court. When Louis finally arrived, it felt like a miracle to many, a sign that France would continue strong. The Bourbon family traced back through Henry IV, who had fought long battles to claim the throne. Before the Bourbons, there had been the Valois kings who ruled during hard times, like the 100 Years' War with England and the religious conflicts that tore the country apart. When the last Valois king died without heirs in 1859, Henry of Bourbon stepped forward, converted, and brought unity. It was not easy, but he did it. So young Louis XIV was born into a line that had known struggle, victory, and the weight of responsibility. From his earliest days, he was taught that he was special, chosen to lead, to protect France, and to keep the kingdom whole. In those days, child mortality was high, even among royals. Many babies did not survive, and kings worried about who would follow them. But Louis grew healthy, watched over carefully by nurses, tutors, and his parents. His early years were filled with the sounds of court life, music, lessons in history and manners, and the stories of his ancestors. He learned early that being king was not just about crowns and palaces, it was about duty, faith, and sometimes hard choices. His father, though often unwell, made sure the boy understood the importance of strong rule. The queen, his mother, gave him warmth and love, things that would stay with him all his life. Looking back, we can see how this birth set the stage for so much. A child born after years of waiting, into a family rebuilding after war and division, in a country ready to rise again. It reminds us, doesn't it, how family lines carry hopes from one generation to the next. Grandparents pass stories to parents, parents to children, and sometimes one person carries them all forward in ways no one expected. Louis would become that person, but in 1638 he was simply a baby, wrapped in royal blankets, with the future waiting quietly ahead. As we continue this story, think about your own family roots, the people who came before you, the strength they showed, the lessons they left. Louis's life would be long and full, with great achievements, deep sorrows, and choices that touched millions. But it all began here, with a newborn prince in a palace near Paris on a September day long ago. What do you feel when you think of such beginnings? A sense of wonder, perhaps, or quiet respect for the weight of history on small shoulders? We have many chapters ahead, so let us walk on gently together. Now, let us look even further back, before the baby Louis was even born, to understand the country he would one day rule. France in the early 17th century was a land with a long and sometimes difficult story. It had known great strength in the past, but also many troubles. Centuries earlier, in the time of Charlemagne, France had been the heart of a vast empire, stretching from the Low Countries to northern Italy, with the emperor ruling over many lands. Those were days of power and unity, when the kingdom felt large and important. Later, in the High Middle Ages, France was still one of the strongest countries in Europe, with grand cathedrals, knights, and kings who commanded respect. But there was a problem that kept coming back. The kingdom was not always tightly held together. Powerful dukes and lords in places like Burgundy, Brittany, and Normandy often acted almost like independent rulers. They had their own armies, their own courts, and sometimes they followed the king only when it suited them. This lack of strong central power led to big troubles. In the middle of the 14th century, the King of England, Edward III, felt bold enough to claim the French throne for himself. That started the 100 Years' War, a long and painful struggle that lasted over a century. Towns were burned, fields lay empty, and many families lost everything. Yet France did not break. Slowly, with help from brave leaders and even figures like Joan of Arc, the French pushed back. By the end of the 15th century, the English were gone from most of the land, and the kingdom began to heal. The old Duchy of Burgundy ended in 1477. Its lands came back under French control, and the country started to feel whole again. Then came new challenges. In the 1490s, French kings turned their eyes to Italy, starting long wars there to challenge Spain's power. It seemed France might become the greatest force in Western Europe, stronger even than the Spanish and Austrian Habsburg families. But just as things looked promising, another storm arrived. In 1517, the Protestant Reformation began, and ideas of change spread across Europe. In most places, the new faith grew in cities, among thinkers and merchants. In France, it was different. Paris stayed strongly Catholic, loyal to the old church. But in rural areas, in the north, south, and southwest, many people welcomed Protestant teachings. These differences grew deeper and soon turned into open fighting. The French Wars of Religion started in 1562 and lasted 36 long years. Brothers fought brothers, families divided, towns were destroyed. The power of the king weakened again, and the old royal house of Valois came to an end in 1589 when King Henry III was killed by a fanatic. Into that chaos stepped Henry of Bourbon, Louis XIV's grandfather, who became Henry IV. He was a strong man, a soldier, and a thinker. To end the wars, he converted to Catholicism, saying those well-known words, "Paris is well worth a mass." Then, in 1598, he issued the Edict of Nantes, a wise compromise that let Protestants live and worship in peace, while keeping Catholicism as the main faith. Within a few years, France began to breathe again. Trade returned, fields were planted, and the kingdom started to recover. By the time Louis XIII, Henry IV's son, took the throne, things were improving, though slowly. Spain, France's old rival, was beginning to weaken, its silver from the Americas running low, its empire stretched too thin. France, on the other hand, had wise ministers like Cardinal Richelieu, who worked to bring more control to the king, to build a stronger army, and to make Paris the true center of power. When young Louis XIV was born in 1338, the stage was set. France was not yet at its peak, but it was rising. The wars, the divisions, the recoveries, all of it had prepared the ground for a king who would take that strength to new heights. Thinking about this history, it reminds us how nations, like families, go through hard seasons. There are times of division, loss, and struggle, followed by periods of healing when wise choices bring people together again. Henry IV's decision to seek peace, even at personal cost, saved countless lives. Richelieu's firm hand helped build the tools a king would need later. It teaches us patience, that good things often come after trials, and that strong leadership can turn things around, but only if it is used with care and fairness. As we move forward in Louis's story, keep this background in mind. He did not start from nothing. He stepped into a country that had already begun to rebuild, a family line that had learned from pain, and a kingdom ready for someone to lead it firmly. What do you think when you look at such long histories? Do they make you feel the weight of time or the hope that each generation can build on the last? We have more to share, so let us continue gently.
Now, let us come to one of the hardest chapters in young Louis's life, the day he became king and the troubles that followed soon after. It was May 14th, 1643. Louis XIII, the boy's father, passed away after a long illness. At just 4.5 years old, Louis XIV was suddenly the King of France. The news spread quickly through the palace. Courtiers bowed low, and the little boy was dressed in mourning black. He was too young to fully grasp what it meant, but the weight of the crown was placed on his small shoulders that day. No child could rule a kingdom alone, so the government passed into the hands of Cardinal Mazarin, the man Richelieu had chosen before his own death. Mazarin was Italian by birth, shrewd and experienced. He kept the kingdom steady during the final years of the 30 Years' War and helped France win key victories that led to the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. That treaty brought a measure of calm to Europe, but France's fight with Spain continued, and the bills for war kept growing. To pay for everything, taxes were raised high, bread prices went up, food became scarce, and ordinary people began to feel the strain. In Paris, whispers of anger turned to shouts. The unrest that started in 1648 became known as the Fronde, a word that means sling, because protesters used slingshots to throw stones at royal guards. It was not one single rebellion, but a series of uprisings, some from the common people, tired of high taxes and hunger, others from powerful nobles who wanted to take back the independence they had lost under strong ministers like Richelieu and Mazarin. The nobles, princes of the blood, even members of the royal family saw a chance to weaken the crown while the king was still a boy. For young Louis, these years were frightening. He was only 10 when the worst of the violence came to Paris. Riots broke out in the streets, crowds gathered, and the royal family had to flee the city more than once. There were nights when the boy king heard the noise of unrest outside the windows, saw fear in the faces of his mother and tutors, and felt the palace shake with the tension. The Fronde dragged on, off and on, until 1653. In the end, Mazarin outlasted the rebels, the nobles were brought back in line, and the crown held firm.
But the experience left a lasting mark on Louis. He never forgot the feeling of being threatened in his own capital, of seeing his power challenged by those who should have been loyal. From that time on, he was determined to keep authority close, to never let nobles or cities grow too strong again, to rule in a way that made sure no Fronde could ever happen under his watch. Historians often point to these years when they explain why Louis became such a firm believer in absolute rule. The Fronde was not just a rebellion, it was a lesson in survival for a young king. He learned early that power must be protected, that trust can be fragile, and moving the court away from Paris to a place he could control completely might be the safest path. Versailles, the grand palace he would build later, had its roots in those fearful nights as a boy. He wanted distance from the crowds, from the memories of stones thrown at his guards, from the risk of being surrounded by discontent. Looking back, we can see how such experiences shape a person. A child who feels his home threatened, who sees his mother anxious, who knows the throne can be shaky, grows cautious, watchful, and strong-willed. It reminds us in our own lives how early hardships can build character, teach us to value stability, and make us careful with the things we hold dear. Louis carried those lessons forward, turning them into a lifetime of firm decisions. Not all were easy, some brought pain to others, but they came from a boy who had learned that weakness invites trouble. As we move on in the story, keep this time in mind. The child king survived, grew, and prepared to take full control. The rebellions ended, but their memory stayed. What do you feel when you think of a young boy facing such storms? A sense of sympathy, perhaps, or respect for how he turned fear into resolve. The road ahead holds more, so let us continue together, step by gentle step.
Let us now come to a moment of peace after so much war, a treaty that brought calm to France's borders, and a marriage that tied the royal family even closer to old rivals. By the late 1650s, both France and Spain were weary. The long wars, especially the one that continued after the 30 Years' War ended, had drained treasuries, cost many lives, and left both kingdoms tired. Spain had troubles of its own, revolts in Portugal, Catalonia, and southern Italy, while France had come through the Fronde and was growing stronger under Mazarin. Finally, in 1659, after years of fighting, the two sides sat down to talk peace. The result was the Treaty of the Pyrenees, signed on a small island in the river that divides France and Spain. It was a fair agreement, but one that favored France more. Under the treaty, France gained lands that strengthened its borders. The county of Artois in the north, parts of Flanders, and the region of Roussillon in the south, near the Pyrenees Mountains, came under French control. These were not small gifts. They helped create the natural frontiers Louis dreamed of, mountains and rivers to protect the kingdom. In return, France gave back some conquered territories, but overall it was a victory for the young king, even though he was not yet ruling fully on his own. Mazarin had negotiated well, and Louis learned from it how diplomacy could win what battles sometimes could not. The treaty also included a marriage, one that linked the two royal houses even tighter. Louis was to wed Maria Theresa, the daughter of King Philip IV of Spain. She was a Habsburg, from the same family that had been France's rival for generations. The match was arranged to seal the peace and to give France a claim to Spanish lands in the future through any children they might have. Maria Theresa was young, pious, quiet, and kind.
She arrived in France with a large dowry, but more important, she brought hope of alliance instead of war. The wedding took place in 1660 in a grand ceremony near the border. Louis, now 21, met his bride, and they were married in a church filled with nobles, music, and celebration. It was a moment of joy, but also one of duty. Royal marriages in those days were rarely just about love. They were about politics, peace, and the future of kingdoms. Louis and Maria Theresa would have 6 children over the years, though sadly only one son, the Grand Dauphin, survived to adulthood. The others died young, a common sorrow in royal families of that time when illness took so many children. This marriage and the treaty marked a turning point. France was no longer fighting for survival. It was expanding, growing more secure. Louis, still under Mazarin's guidance, saw how peace could bring strength. He learned that borders could be won at the table as well as on the field, and that family ties, even with old enemies, could help keep the peace. Yet the Habsburg blood in his wife would later give him a claim to the Spanish throne, a claim that would spark new wars in the future. Peace, it seems, often plants the seeds of the next conflict. Looking back, we can see the wisdom in seeking calm after storm. The treaty gave France breathing room, time to rebuild, to plan, to grow. It reminds us how important it is after hard times to choose paths that heal rather than divide. Henry IV had done it with the Edict of Nantes. Mazarin and Louis did it here with the Pyrenees. Such moments do not erase the past, but they open doors to better days. For ordinary people, peace meant lower taxes, safer roads, more food on the table. For kings, it meant a chance to build rather than just defend. As we continue, notice how this peace set the stage for Louis's full rule. The young king was learning, watching, preparing. The marriage brought personal happiness for a time and political advantage for years to come. What do you feel about such arranged unions or treaties that end wars but carry hidden futures? They show us that history is full of choices, each one leading to the next. Let us walk on. The story grows richer still.
Now let us come to the day when the young king stepped forward, no longer a boy guided by others, but a man ready to hold the reins himself. It was March 1661. Cardinal Mazarin, the man who had steered France through war, rebellion, and peace, passed away. He had been more than a minister to Louis. He had been a teacher, a protector, almost a second father during those uncertain years. With Mazarin gone, the 22-year-old king faced a choice. Many expected him to name another chief minister, to keep the old ways. Instead, Louis made a quiet but firm announcement. He would rule in his own right, without a principal advisor standing above him. From that moment on, he said, he would oversee the government personally. No more powerful figures like Richelieu or Mazarin would overshadow the throne. Power would flow directly from the king. This was a bold step, and one that surprised the court. Louis had watched carefully during his minority, learned from Mazarin how to manage ministers, how to balance factions, how to keep control. Now he put those lessons to work. He gathered his council, the secretaries of state, the intendants, and made it clear loyalty was to him alone. He would listen, he would consult, but the final word was his. This marked the true beginning of his personal rule and the full flowering of the absolute monarchy he believed in so deeply. In the years that followed, Louis worked hard to make sure no one could challenge him again. He kept the nobles close, but not too close. Many were invited to court,
given honors, titles, pensions, but kept away from real power in the provinces. He used the intendants, trusted officials sent out to oversee regions, to report directly to him, bypassing local lords. He reformed taxes, courts, and administration, always aiming to strengthen the center, Paris, and the king himself. He never called the Estates General, the old assembly that could question royal decisions, not once in his long reign. Money came from other sources, customs duties, salt taxes, trade, so he did not need to ask permission. This shift was not just about power, it was about safety. The Fronde had taught him what could happen when authority weakened. He remembered the nights of fear, the flight from Paris, the feeling that his throne could be shaken. Now he built a system where such things could not happen. He wanted order, stability, and a France that answered to one voice. It worked in many ways. France became more unified, administration more efficient, the army stronger. But it also meant that everything depended on him, his health, his judgment, his choices. If the king was wise, the kingdom prospered. If not, the risks were great. Looking back, we can see this as a turning point. Louis took what his grandfather and father had started and carried it to its fullest. He believed that strong rule brought peace, progress, and pride. And for a time, it did. The country felt secure, borders grew, culture flourished. Yet we must also remember the human side. When one man holds so much, ordinary people, nobles, even families sometimes feel small. Decisions become personal, and mistakes can echo far. It reminds us in our own quieter lives how important balance is. Strong leadership can guide a family, a community, or a nation through storms. But when it becomes too concentrated, it can lose the wisdom that comes from many voices. Louis chose his path, shaped by his childhood, by the lessons of survival. He ruled with conviction and left a mark that lasted long after him. As we go on, see how this moment opened the door to everything else: the palace, the wars, the grandeur. The king was now fully in charge, ready to shape France in his image. What do you think about such a bold step, taking full control at such a young age? Does it inspire, or make you thoughtful about the burdens it brings? The story continues. Let us keep walking together.
Let us pause here for a moment and look at the heart of how Louis chose to rule, the idea that shaped everything he did after taking full control. He believed deeply in what we call royal absolutism, the thought that a king should hold all power in his hands, answerable only to God, not to nobles, not to parliaments, not to the people. This idea was not new. It had roots going back centuries. In ancient times, some rulers were seen as gods on earth, with subjects bowing low. In medieval Europe, kings had to share power with lords who gave loyalty, knights who fought, and assemblies that granted money. But by the 17th century, some thinkers and kings felt that strong central rule was needed to bring order after wars, rebellions, and division. Louis took this belief to its highest point and made it the center of his life. For him, the king was like the sun, giving light and life to the whole kingdom. Everything revolved around him. He once said, "L'État c'est moi," I am the state. Whether he spoke those exact words or not, they captured his view perfectly. He saw no room for divided authority. Nobles might have titles, lands, and honors, but real decisions came from him alone. Parliaments, which in some countries could limit kings, were never called in France during his entire reign.
Taxes, laws, war, peace, all flowed from the royal will. Ministers served at his pleasure and could be dismissed if they stepped out of line. This way of ruling had practical reasons. Louis had seen the Fronde, the chaos when nobles and crowds challenged the crown. He remembered how weak rule invited trouble, how his own childhood had been shaken by unrest. To him, absolutism was not just pride, it was protection. A strong king could keep peace inside the country, defend borders, build roads, support arts, and make France respected abroad. And in many ways it worked. The kingdom became more unified, administration cleaner, the army professional. France felt like one strong nation, not a collection of regions pulling in different directions. Yet every philosophy has its shadows. When power rests in one person, the kingdom rises or falls with that person's wisdom, health, and fairness. Mistakes become larger because there are fewer voices to balance them. Nobles felt pushed aside, some grew resentful, others flattered to stay close. Ordinary people, while safer from civil war, had less say in taxes or laws that touched their daily lives. Louis knew this, but he believed the good outweighed the risks. He trusted his judgment, guided by faith and by the lessons of his youth. Looking back, we can see both sides. Absolutism brought France to a peak of glory, cultural splendor, military strength, and pride. It inspired other rulers who looked to Versailles as a model. But it also planted seeds of future trouble when the system grew rigid, debts mounted, and people longed for more balance. It teaches us, gently, that no way of leading is perfect forever. Strong hands can guide through storms, but open hearts and shared wisdom often keep the peace longer. As we go forward, keep this belief in mind. It explains why Louis built Versailles, why he fought his wars, why he shaped France as he did. The king was not just a man on a throne, he was the center of everything, by choice and by conviction. What comes to your mind when you think of such complete authority? Does it feel like security or a heavy burden? The story deepens. Let us continue together with patience and care.
Let us now turn to one of the most famous things Louis created, a place that became the symbol of his rule, the Grand Palace of Versailles. Work began in 1661, right around the time Louis took full control after Mazarin's death. He chose a spot southwest of Paris, a royal hunting lodge that had existed for years. It was quiet, surrounded by woods, far from the busy streets and memories of unrest in the capital. Louis wanted something much larger, something magnificent, a palace that would show the world the power and glory of France. He hired the finest architects, Louis Laveau to design the buildings, André Lenotte to create the gardens, and later Jules Ardouin-Monsart to expand it even more. What started as a small lodge grew into a vast complex with 3 main wings, thousands of rooms, and gardens that stretched for miles. The palace itself took about 20 years to reach its full form. The central part held the king's apartments, the hall of mirrors, grand salons, and chapels. The wings were for nobles, courtiers, and staff. Inside, everything was rich: gold leaf, marble, paintings, mirrors that reflected light like 1,000 suns. Outside, the gardens were a wonder, with fountains, statues, groves of trees, and paths laid out in perfect symmetry.
Water features danced, flowers bloomed in patterns, and even a small zoo was added for the court's amusement. The whole place was meant to impress, to make visitors feel the king's greatness, and to keep the court under his watchful eye. Why did Louis build it? There were practical reasons. Paris had been dangerous for him as a boy during the Fronde, when mobs filled the streets and nobles challenged the crown. He never forgot that fear. By moving the court to Versailles, far from the city, he created distance, safety, and control. Nobles who wanted favor had to live near him, attend his daily routines, ask permission to leave. It kept them busy, occupied, and loyal. The palace became a kind of gilded cage, beautiful, but one where the king was always at the center. But it was more than safety. Versailles was a statement. It showed Europe that France was the leading power, cultured, wealthy, refined. Rulers in other lands, from Austria to Russia, looked at it with envy and tried to copy it. The palace hosted banquets, ballets, operas, hunts, and ceremonies that made the French court the envy of the continent. Louis loved the arts, supported musicians, playwrights, painters, and architects. Versailles was his stage, where he could shine as the Sun King, and where France could feel proud. Of course, such grandeur came at a cost. Building it took huge sums of money, taxes from the people, labor from thousands of workers. Some died in the construction, from accidents or disease. The upkeep, with so many servants, cooks, gardeners, was endless. Critics, even in Louis's time, wondered if the money could have helped ordinary families more. Yet for Louis it was worth it. He saw the palace as a legacy, a sign of order, beauty, and strength after years of chaos. Looking back, Versailles stands as both triumph and warning. It brought culture to new heights, inspired generations, and gave France a lasting symbol. But it also showed how one man's vision, when carried too far, can strain a nation. It reminds us, gently, that beauty and power are wonderful, but they must be balanced with care for those who support them. Louis built something eternal, yet he also built a reminder that even kings must think of tomorrow. As we continue, picture this palace in your mind. The light in the mirrors, the sound of fountains, the king walking its halls. It was his home, his court, his statement to the world. What does it make you feel? Awe at the achievement, or quiet thought about its price? The story moves on. Let us keep going together.
Let us now come to one of the most difficult and debated choices of Louis's later reign, his decision to end religious toleration and to make France a country of one faith. The story begins long before Louis, with his grandfather, Henry IV. In 1598, after years of religious wars that had torn France apart, Henry issued the Edict of Nantes. It was a wise compromise, declaring Catholicism the official religion, but giving Protestants, called Huguenots, the right to worship freely, to hold office, and to live in peace in certain towns. The edict brought calm, allowed families to rebuild, and helped France heal after decades of fighting between Catholics and Protestants. For almost a century it held, even though tensions remained. Louis, however, saw things differently. He was a devoted Catholic, raised in the faith, and he believed that one king, one law, one faith was the best way to keep the kingdom united and strong.
To him, religious division was a weakness, a door for unrest, much like the Fronde had been. He did not hate the Huguenots personally. Many were loyal, hard-working, and useful in trade and crafts. But he wanted uniformity, a France where everyone shared the same beliefs under the king's guidance. The French Church, already independent from Rome in many ways, gave him great control over religious matters, and he wanted to extend that to all. The crackdown began quietly in the 1680s. Soldiers were billeted in Protestant homes, a practice called dragoons, where troops lived with families, pressuring them to convert. It was not always violent, but it was intimidating, and many Huguenots felt forced. Then, in 1685, Louis signed the Edict of Fontainebleau, revoking the Edict of Nantes completely. Protestant worship was banned, churches closed, schools shut, pastors exiled. Hundreds of thousands of Huguenots left France, fleeing to England, the Dutch Republic, Switzerland, Germany, and even America or South Africa. They took their skills, their businesses, and their families, and their departure hurt France's economy, especially in textile towns and ports. Louis also turned his attention to other groups within Catholicism, like the Jansenists, a movement that emphasized grace, simplicity, and strict morals. He saw them as a challenge to royal and church authority, and persecuted them too, closing their schools, exiling leaders. His goal was clear: a unified church, loyal to the king, without divisions that could weaken the state. This policy was not without debate, even in his time. Some advisers warned that persecution would drive away talent, create enemies abroad, and harm France. But Louis believed the long-term good, unity, obedience, and moral strength would outweigh the losses. He saw it as a duty, a way to protect the souls of his people and the stability of the kingdom. Looking back, this remains one of the most controversial parts of his reign. The Revocation brought France closer to religious uniformity, but at a high price. Families were divided, communities lost members, and the country lost skilled workers who never returned. It reminds us gently how deeply faith and freedom touch each other, and how hard choices, made with conviction, can leave lasting wounds. Many older folks today might remember times when beliefs caused division in families or neighborhoods, how painful it was, and how healing took generations. Louis acted from his understanding of duty, but the human cost was real, and the lesson endures. Unity is precious, but so is kindness toward those who differ. As we near the end of the story, this decision shows the king in his later years, more set in his ways, more focused on control, less open to compromise. The palace at Versailles stood grand, but outside, choices like this shaped lives in quieter, deeper ways. What comes to your mind about such matters of faith and power? Understanding for the intent, or sorrow for the suffering? Let us keep going. The final chapter awaits, together.
Let us now turn to a more private side of Louis's life, the family, the relationships, and the quiet moments away from the throne and the court. Louis was a man of strong feelings, though he kept them closely guarded in public. His first marriage to Maria Theresa of Spain was arranged for peace and politics, but it grew into real affection over time. She was gentle, pious, charitable, and devoted. They had 6 children between 1661 and 1672,
3 sons and 3 daughters. Sadly, as was common in those days, child mortality was high. 3 died in infancy, 2 in childhood, and only the eldest son, Louis, the Grand Dauphin, survived to carry the line forward. The Queen bore these losses quietly, with faith and grace, and Louis, though often busy, showed her respect and care. Their marriage was not without strain. The king had other interests, but Maria Theresa remained the official queen, loved by the people for her kindness. Louis was not faithful in the way we might hope from a husband today. He had several long-term mistresses, relationships that were open at court, though painful for the queen. In the 1660s, Louise de la Vallière was his first great love, a gentlewoman who bore him 4 children, some recognized, some not. She lived at court, her position known to all, a source of humiliation for Maria Theresa, who endured it with quiet dignity. Later, in the 1670s, Françoise Athénée, Marquise de Montespan, took her place, a beautiful, witty, and ambitious woman who bore the king several more children. These relationships were public, acknowledged, and part of court life, though they caused gossip and sorrow behind closed doors. There were others, too, brief connections with members of the Mancini family, nieces of Cardinal Mazarin, who brought Italian grace to the French court. Louis was a man who sought companionship, affection, and perhaps escape from the weight of rule. He fathered over a dozen illegitimate children that we know of, probably more, and he cared for them, giving titles, education, and places at court. Yet these choices left marks. The Queen suffered silently, and Louis, in later years, grew more reflective about his life. After the affair of the poisons, and as the Queen's health failed, things changed. Maria Theresa died in the summer of 1683 from complications of an abscess at only 44. Louis mourned her sincerely, and within months he entered a secret marriage with Françoise d'Aubienne, the Marquise de Maintenon. She had been governess to his illegitimate children by Montespan, a woman of intelligence, piety, and strong character. The marriage was never officially announced. She never became queen, but it lasted until Louis's death, over 30 years. Maintenon brought stability, moral guidance, and a quieter private life. She encouraged the king toward more devotion, less extravagance, and a turn away from earlier excesses. This personal journey shows the human side of the Sun King. He was not just the ruler on the throne. He was a husband, father, and man who felt joy, regret, loss, and the need for love. His early affairs were part of the court's culture, but later he sought something deeper, more steady. The secret marriage to Maintenon in his 50s marked a change toward reflection, faith, and simpler joys. It reminds us, gently, that even the most powerful people carry private hearts, face sorrows, and seek comfort in relationships that endure. Looking back, we see a life full of contrasts: public grandeur, private struggles, children lost, loves gained and faded. Louis's family story, like many, was marked by both happiness and pain, duty and desire. Many older folks today might remember how relationships evolve over long years, how early passions give way to deeper companionship, and how loss teaches us to cherish what remains. Louis's life shows that no crown shields us from these human truths. As we continue, this personal side adds depth to the king we have followed. The man behind the title, with his joys and regrets, now comes clearer. What thoughts come to you about such private lives of great figures? Sympathy for their humanity or quiet respect for their endurance? The story nears its end. Let us keep going together with kindness.
Let us now step inside the world Louis built, the daily rhythm of life at Versailles, where the court became a living reflection of his power, and where every hour followed a careful pattern. By 1682, after 21 years of building, the king officially moved the entire court to Versailles. This was no small move. Hundreds of senior nobles, thousands of lesser courtiers, their families, servants, cooks, gardeners, all relocated. The palace had over 2,000 rooms, with the royal apartments in the center, wings for the nobles, and endless halls filled with mirrors, gold, and art. The nearby village grew into a busy town, feeding and serving this huge household. Versailles was not just a home, it was a small city, a stage, a symbol, and a way for Louis to keep everyone close, under his eye, far from the old dangers of Paris. The king's day followed a strict routine, almost like a ceremony. He rose around 8:30 in the morning, surrounded by servants. A doctor checked his health. He was shaved, dressed in elaborate clothes, and then came the lever, the formal rising, where selected nobles helped with his clothing, a sign of favor. After a light breakfast, he walked through the famous Hall of Mirrors, a long gallery of glass and light, where the court could see him and he could see them. This daily parade showed the king was present, active, and at the center of everything. Mornings were for work. Louis met his ministers, read reports, signed letters, and decided matters of state. After Mazarin's death, and later Colbert's, he relied on a small group of loyal men, but he always made the final choices himself. Afternoons were for hunting in the vast parks around the palace, with deer, hounds, and fresh air. He loved the chase, the exercise, the escape from papers. Evenings brought social events, dinners, concerts, ballets, plays, or fireworks, often with hundreds of guests. Visiting ambassadors, foreign princes, or local nobles came, all dressed in fine clothes, speaking French, the language of the court. Then, late at night, came the coucher, the formal undressing, again with chosen nobles helping, a ritual that ended the day. This routine was more than habit. It kept order, gave nobles something to do, and made sure everyone knew their place. To be near the king, to be invited to his events, to catch his eye, was the highest honor. Courtiers spent fortunes on clothes, carriages, and gifts just to stay in favor. Versailles was beautiful, dazzling, but it was also strict, with etiquette rules, hierarchies, and little room for privacy. Louis enjoyed the grandeur, the music, the art, but he also used it to control, to watch, to prevent plots like those from the Fronde. Yet, behind the splendor, there were human moments. The king missed his family at times, worried about his health, and felt the loneliness that comes with absolute power. The queen, then later Madame de Maintenon, brought warmth to his private rooms. Children and grandchildren visited, though many died young, leaving sorrow. The palace echoed with laughter, music, and conversation, but also with whispers, jealousy, and the weight of being watched always. Looking back, Versailles teaches us about the double edge of greatness. It was a place of beauty, culture, and achievement, inspiring Europe for a century.
But it was also a reminder that too much control, too much display, can separate a leader from ordinary life and make simple joys harder to find. Many older folks today might remember times when they longed for simpler days, away from crowds or expectations. Louis created a wonder, but he also lived in a world of his own making, both magnificent and confining. As we continue, picture those halls, the light in the mirrors, the sound of footsteps on marble, the king at the center. It was his life, his court, his legacy. What do you feel when you imagine such a routine? Admiration for the order, or quiet thought about what it cost? The story turns more personal now. Let us keep going together, gently.
Let us now turn to a darker chapter in Louis's reign, one that shook the court and showed that even in the grand halls of Versailles, shadows of fear and suspicion could creep in. It was around the late 1670s, as the Franco-Dutch War was winding down, that strange rumors began to spread in Paris and at court. People whispered about mysterious deaths, nobles, officials, even some close to the king dying suddenly, often in pain, with no clear cause. At first, these were just quiet talks, but in 1677, the whispers turned into something much louder. A fortune-teller named Madeleine de la Grange was arrested, accused of murder, forgery, and dark practices. Under questioning, she spoke of a web of poisonings, black magic, and secret rituals involving powerful people. What followed became known as the Affair of the Poisons, a scandal that lasted 5 full years until 1682 and left deep marks on the royal court. The investigation grew quickly, like a fire spreading in dry grass. One accusation led to another, arrests multiplied, and soon dozens of people were involved, including nobles, courtiers, priests, and even some of Louis's own mistresses from earlier years. There were claims of love potions, poisons sold in secret, and ceremonies meant to curse or control others. The name La Voisin, a famous fortune-teller and poisoner, came up again and again. She was arrested, tortured, and executed, but before she died, she named many others. The king himself ordered a special court, the Chambre Ardente, to look into it all, and hundreds were questioned, imprisoned, or banished. For Louis, this was a painful time. He had always tried to keep his court orderly, moral, and under his eye. Now rumors touched even his inner circle. Some of his former favorites, women he had once cared for, came under suspicion. The queen, Maria Theresa, who was quiet and pious, briefly regained favor as the scandal made Louis more careful about his private life. In the end, 36 people were executed, many more banished or exiled, and the court was shaken. The king moved the whole court to Versailles in 1682, partly to escape the memory of Paris, but also to start fresh in a place he could control completely. The affair was not just about poison. It showed how fear could spread, how one accusation could ruin lives, and how even a powerful king could feel threatened by unseen dangers. Louis acted firmly, ordering the investigations, but he also showed mercy in some cases, pardoning those who seemed innocent. He wanted the truth, but he also wanted calm to return. The scandal faded, but it left a lesson. Even in a court of splendor, human weakness, jealousy, and desperation could hide in the shadows. Looking back, we can see this as a reminder of how fragile trust can be.
When rumors grow, when fear takes hold, people turn on each other, and even strong leaders feel the weight. Louis had built a system of order, but no system can protect against every human failing. It teaches us gently to be careful with our words, to seek truth calmly, and to remember that power, no matter how great, cannot shield us from sorrow or doubt. Many older folks today might remember times when suspicion spread in their own communities, how it hurt relationships, and how healing took time. As we continue, this scandal marked a shift. The king grew more private, more watchful, and Versailles became not just a palace, but a refuge. The story grows more personal now. Let us keep going together, with care and understanding.
Let us now look beyond the borders of France itself, to the lands across the seas, where Louis and his ministers worked to grow the kingdom's reach and wealth. France had been exploring and settling overseas since the early 1600s, but under Louis, the effort became more organized and ambitious. Before his full rule, French colonies were modest, small trading posts along the St. Lawrence River in Canada, a few islands in the Caribbean, and scattered outposts. England and the Dutch had moved ahead with larger settlements, more people, and stronger trade. Louis saw this and decided France must catch up. He wanted colonies to supply raw materials, buy French goods, and add to the kingdom's power and glory. One of the most important steps was in Canada, called New France. Colbert, the economic minister, pushed hard to encourage families to settle there. To help, he sent hundreds of young women, many orphans or from poor families, known as the King's Daughters. About 800 went between 1663 and 1673, marrying settlers, starting families, and helping the population grow. Their work made a lasting difference. Today, millions of people in North America trace their ancestry to them. The colony expanded, with Quebec as its main center, fur trade thriving, and French influence spreading along the rivers. In the Caribbean, France gained several sugar islands, like Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Saint-Domingue, later called Haiti. Sugar plantations brought wealth, though they relied on hard labor, including enslaved people from Africa. Louis's government supported these colonies, sending ships, soldiers, and rules to protect trade. He also founded the French East India Company in 1664 to compete in Asia, trading spices, textiles, and other goods. Though it never matched the Dutch or English companies, it showed France's determination to be part of global trade. Later in his reign, explorers pushed farther. From the mouth of the Mississippi River, French adventurers moved north, linking up with Canada and claiming a vast territory named Louisiana after the king. It was a bold dream to contain the English along the east coast and create a French arc across North America. Missions, forts, and trading posts appeared, carrying French language, faith, and customs deep into the continent. These efforts brought money, resources, and pride. Colonies supplied timber, furs, sugar, and new markets for French products. They strengthened the navy, created jobs, and showed Europe that France was a world power, not just a European one. Louis saw this as part of his vision, extending France's light like the sun across oceans. But expansion had heavy costs. Building colonies took time, money, and lives.
Many settlers faced harsh winters, disease, and conflicts with native peoples. The trade in enslaved people, which grew under these policies, brought deep suffering, a shadow that history cannot ignore. Louis and his ministers believed colonies were necessary for strength, but the human price was high and the benefits uneven. Thinking about this time, it shows us how far-reaching ambition can be. A king in Europe, looking across seas, trying to build a larger world for his people. It reminds us, gently, that growth often comes with responsibility, to treat others fairly, to care for those who build the future. Louis expanded France's horizons, but the lessons of fairness and kindness remain for every generation. As we continue, see how these distant lands supported the kingdom at home, funding palaces, armies, and dreams. The king looked outward, and the story grew wider. What comes to mind when you think of such far-away efforts? Wonder at discovery, or thought about the people involved? Let us keep going. The path is long.
Let us now come to a war that started with great success for France, but turned into a long and difficult struggle, the Franco-Dutch War of 1672 to 1678, and the famous year the Dutch call the Rampjaar, the disaster year. The seeds of this war were planted right after the War of Devolution ended. Louis had gained lands, but he still looked to the east, toward the Rhine, and he saw the Dutch Republic as an obstacle. The Dutch provinces, Holland, Zeeland, and others had once been part of the Spanish Netherlands, but they had fought long and hard, from 1568 onward in the 80 Years' War, to win their independence. By the 1670s, the Dutch were rich, powerful in trade, masters of the sea, and a strong ally for anyone who wanted to check French growth. Louis wanted to weaken them, take some of their land, and open the way to the Rhine. He prepared carefully. He paid King Charles II of England a secret pension to keep England neutral or even helpful. He made alliances with some German princes. Then, on April 6, 1672, he declared war. The French army, large, well-equipped, and led by talented generals, moved fast. In May and June, they overran the southern provinces of the Dutch Republic, capturing towns, forts, and advancing straight toward Amsterdam. It was one of the most striking campaigns of the century. The Dutch were shocked, their golden age of trade and art suddenly under threat. They called it the Rampjaar, the year of disaster. In desperation, the Dutch did something extraordinary. They opened the dikes, let the sea flood their low-lying lands, creating a water barrier that stopped the French advance. The flood saved Amsterdam, but it ruined farms, homes, and livelihoods for years. Fields turned to lakes, villages were cut off, and people suffered greatly. Louis's troops halted, unable to push further. The initial victory slipped away. Soon, Spain and the Austrian Habsburgs joined the Dutch side, and even England, who had started as an ally, switched against France. What began as a quick campaign became a long, bitter war, dragging on for 6 years. Battles were fought on land and sea. French forces won many engagements, but the Dutch navy, under admirals like de Ruyter, held strong. The war spread, touching Germany, Spain, and the colonies. Louis himself led troops in the early years, showing courage, but as time passed, the cost grew. Soldiers died, supplies low, taxes rose again, and people in France felt the strain. In 1678, the Treaty of Nimegen ended the war.
Louis gained more land, especially Franche-Comté from Spain, and some pockets in the northeast. He did not take much from the Dutch, but France's borders moved closer to the Rhine, and the kingdom looked stronger on the map. This war showed Louis's determination, but also the limits of his power. The Dutch, though small, fought with everything they had, and Europe began to unite against him more often. The rampjaar became a symbol of resistance, how a people can defend their freedom even at great cost. For Louis, it was a lesson in patience, that quick wins are rare, and that enemies can become stronger when threatened. Looking back, we see the human side of such conflicts. Families in the Netherlands lost homes to flood, French families lost sons to battle, and whole regions suffered for years. Louis believed he was protecting France's future, making it safe, respected, and whole. Yet wars, even when won, leave scars, debts, and memories that last. It reminds us gently that strength is important, but so is wisdom, knowing when to stop, when to talk, when to choose peace. Ambition can open doors, but it can also close hearts. As we continue, this war marked a change. The king had tasted both victory and frustration, and Europe had learned to fear him more. The story grows heavier, but also richer. What comes to your mind when you think of such long struggles, the courage on both sides or the sorrow they bring? Let us keep walking together, slowly, thoughtfully.
Let us now come to the first major war that Louis started himself, a short but important conflict known as the War of Devolution. This war began in May 1667, soon after Louis had taken full personal rule. It lasted only about a year, until May 1668, but it showed Europe what the new king was willing to do to reach his goals. The name devolution comes from an old legal idea in parts of the Spanish Netherlands, a custom saying that certain lands should pass to the children of a first marriage. Louis used this as a reason to claim territories that had come to Spain through inheritance. His wife Maria Theresa, as the daughter of Philip IV of Spain, had a right, he argued, to parts of the Spanish Netherlands, including places like Franche-Comté and areas around Lille. Spain was weak at the time, exhausted from long wars, revolts in Portugal, and empty treasuries. France, on the other hand, was ready. Louis had built a strong army, well-paid, well-trained, and loyal. When he invaded, his troops moved quickly, occupying large parts of the Spanish Netherlands, including cities like Lille, Cambrai, Tournai, and Charleroi. The French forces were disciplined, and the campaign went smoothly. Louis himself rode with the army, showing his men he shared their hardships and proving to Europe that he was not afraid to lead from the front. The war ended with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1668. Louis gave back Franche-Comté, which his troops had taken, but kept a solid chunk of the northeast, lands that helped form the border we see today between France and Belgium. It was a clear gain for France, a step toward the natural frontiers Louis wanted. The war was short, but it served as a test. Louis saw that France could win when prepared, that Spain was no longer the power it had been, and that quick action could bring results. This conflict also showed his style. He did not seek endless war, but when he saw an opportunity, he acted decisively. He used diplomacy too, making sure England stayed neutral, and the Dutch, though worried, did not join him yet. The victory strengthened his position at home, gave the army confidence, and added lands that brought more taxes, resources, and security.
Yet even a short war has its price. Soldiers died, families waited for news, towns changed hands, and people on both sides felt the hardship. Louis believed these steps were necessary for France's safety and future. He saw the gains as rightful, based on law, marriage, and strength. Others, especially in the Netherlands and England, began to see him as a threat, a king who would keep pushing until stopped. Looking back, this war was a turning point. It proved Louis could fight and win, but it also planted seeds of caution in other countries. They started to watch France more closely, to form alliances, to prepare. It reminds us gently that even justified gains can create fear, and fear can lead to bigger conflicts later. Ambition, when successful, often invites challenge. As we continue, this first war set the pattern for others that followed, larger, longer, more costly. The king had tasted victory, and the story grew more serious. What do you feel about such early successes? Pride in boldness, or quiet thought about what comes next? Let us keep going together, one chapter at a time.
Let us now step outside France's borders and look at how Louis looked at the wider world, his dreams for the kingdom, and the wars he fought to make them real. From the beginning of his personal rule, Louis had a clear goal for France, to make it safe, strong, and naturally bounded. He believed every great nation needed clear lines it could defend, natural barriers that would protect its people. In the south, the high Pyrenees mountains stood between France and Spain, a strong wall. Toward Italy, the Alps offered the same. But to the east, the great river Rhine drew his eye most of all. If France could reach that wide river, it would have a firm, natural frontier, a line that armies would find hard to cross. To achieve this, he needed to take lands in the Spanish Netherlands, parts of what is now Belgium, Luxembourg, and Western Germany, and even some Dutch territory. These were not small aims. They meant changing the map of Europe, and that almost always meant war. Louis did not rush into conflict without thought. He built the army carefully, trained it well, paid the soldiers on time, and made sure they answered only to him. He watched other countries, made alliances when useful, and waited for the right moment. But when he saw an opportunity, he moved. His foreign policy was bold, sometimes aggressive, always aimed at security and glory. He wanted France to be the leading power in Europe, respected, feared when needed, and safe from invasion. The wars he started or joined were not small skirmishes. They were large, costly, and often spread across many countries. They lasted years, sometimes decades, and shaped the continent for generations. In the 1660s and 1670s, his focus was on the east and northeast. He saw the Spanish Netherlands as part of France's rightful inheritance through his wife's family, and the Rhine as the key to lasting safety. He prepared for war, strengthened forts, gathered supplies, and built alliances, or paid others to stay neutral. When he fought, he led from the front in the early years, riding with his troops, showing courage and inspiring loyalty. Later, as he grew older, he directed from Versailles, but the goal stayed the same: expand to the natural borders, secure France, and leave a legacy of strength. These wars brought gains. Lands were added, borders pushed outward, and France grew larger and more defensible. But they also brought heavy costs. Armies marched for years, young men died far from home, taxes rose to pay for everything, and other nations banded together against him. Europe saw France as a threat, and coalitions formed to stop his advance. Louis believed the risks were worth it.
that a stronger France meant a safer future for his people. He saw himself as protector, builder, and rightful leader. Looking back, we can see the balance. Ambition drove progress, borders that still exist today, a France that felt secure for a time. But wars take a toll on families, on treasuries, on trust between nations. Louis's goals were rooted in care for his country, but they came at a price that touched many lives. It reminds us gently that dreams of safety and greatness, when pursued too hard, can lead to burdens no one fully expected. As we continue, we will look at the specific wars, the victories, the losses, and the lessons they left. The king looked outward, and the world answered. What do you feel when you think of such far-reaching plans? Pride and boldness, or quiet thought about the human cost? The story deepens. Let us keep walking together.
Let us now look beyond the borders of France itself, to the lands across the seas, where Louis and his ministers worked to grow the kingdom's reach and wealth. France had been exploring and settling overseas since the early 1600s, but under Louis, the effort became more organized and ambitious. Before his full rule, French colonies were modest, small trading posts along the St. Lawrence River in Canada, a few islands in the Caribbean, and scattered outposts. England and the Dutch had moved ahead with larger settlements, more people, and stronger trade. Louis saw this and decided France must catch up. He wanted colonies to supply raw materials, buy French goods, and add to the kingdom's power and glory. One of the most important steps was in Canada, called New France. Colbert, the economic minister, pushed hard to encourage families to settle there. To help, he sent hundreds of young women, many orphans or from poor families, known as the King's Daughters. About 800 went between 1663 and 1673, marrying settlers, starting families, and helping the population grow. Their work made a lasting difference. Today, millions of people in North America trace their ancestry to them. The colony expanded, with Quebec as its main center, fur trade thriving, and French influence spreading along the rivers. In the Caribbean, France gained several sugar islands, like Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Saint-Domingue, later called Haiti. Sugar plantations brought wealth, though they relied on hard labor, including enslaved people from Africa. Louis's government supported these colonies, sending ships, soldiers, and rules to protect trade. He also founded the French East India Company in 1664 to compete in Asia, trading spices, textiles, and other goods. Though it never matched the Dutch or English companies, it showed France's determination to be part of global trade. Later in his reign, explorers pushed farther. From the mouth of the Mississippi River, French adventurers moved north, linking up with Canada and claiming a vast territory named Louisiana after the king. It was a bold dream to contain the English along the east coast and create a French arc across North America. Missions, forts, and trading posts appeared, carrying French language, faith, and customs deep into the continent. These efforts brought money, resources, and pride. Colonies supplied timber, furs, sugar, and new markets for French products. They strengthened the navy, created jobs, and showed Europe that France was a world power, not just a European one. Louis saw this as part of his vision, extending France's light like the sun across oceans. But expansion had heavy costs.
Building colonies took time, money, and lives. Many settlers faced harsh winters, disease, and conflicts with native peoples. The trade in enslaved people, which grew under these policies, brought deep suffering, a shadow that history cannot ignore. Louis and his ministers believed colonies were necessary for strength, but the human price was high and the benefits uneven. Thinking about this time, it shows us how far-reaching ambition can be. A king in Europe, looking across seas, trying to build a larger world for his people. It reminds us gently that growth often comes with responsibility, to treat others fairly, to care for those who build the future. Louis expanded France's horizons, but the lessons of fairness and kindness remain for every generation. As we continue, see how these distant lands supported the kingdom at home, funding palaces, armies, and dreams. The king looked outward, and the story grew wider. What comes to mind when you think of such faraway efforts? Wonder at discovery, or thought about the people involved? Let us keep going. The path is long.
Let us now look at how Louis strengthened the kingdom from within by building its wealth, and one man played a key role in that work. After Mazarin died, Louis needed someone to handle the money side of things. He chose Jean-Baptiste Colbert, a careful, hard-working minister who had served under Mazarin. Colbert was not like the great cardinals of the past. He did not try to overshadow the king. Louis made sure of that. Instead, Colbert focused almost completely on the economy, and he had a clear vision. At that time, many people believed in mercantilism, the idea that there was only so much wealth in the world, and each country had to grab as much as it could through trade, colonies, and careful rules. Colbert followed this thinking, but he did it in a smart way that still earns respect from historians today. He worked to grow France's trade and industry. France had fallen behind England and the Dutch, who controlled most of the shipping in the North Sea and Atlantic. Colbert built up the merchant navy, encouraged shipbuilding, and created companies to trade overseas. He reformed the old guild system, which had become too strict, and helped start new factories, workshops, and industries. He wanted French goods like cloth, furniture, and luxury items to be the best in Europe, so people in other countries would buy them. He also lowered some taxes on trade, built roads and canals to move goods faster, and made sure the quality of French products stayed high. One of his biggest focuses was the colonies. France had places in Canada, the Caribbean, and later Louisiana, but they were small compared to England's settlements. Colbert sent young women, many orphans, called the King's Daughters, to Canada to help families grow there. Thousands went, and today millions of North Americans trace their roots to them. He founded the French East India Company to compete in Asia and supported sugar plantations in the islands, though that work had its dark sides we must acknowledge. All of this brought in more money, gold, silver, and goods, which filled the royal treasury. Without that money, projects like Versailles, the army, and the arts would have been impossible. Colbert worked closely with Louis, but the king always stayed in charge. He gave Colbert freedom on economic matters, but never let him become too powerful. When Colbert died in 1683, Louis mourned him, but the system continued. The reforms had lasting effects. France became richer, more self-sufficient, and better able to support its ambitions.
Yet mercantilism had limits. It sometimes led to strict rules, high tariffs, and wars over trade. Still, Colbert's careful planning helped France stand tall for many years. Thinking about this time, it shows us how important wise management of resources can be. A kingdom, like a household, needs steady income, good planning, and hard work to thrive. Colbert was not flashy. He was practical, focused on details, and loyal to his king. It reminds us that true strength often comes from quiet effort, not just grand displays. Louis knew this and chose a man who could build the foundation while he led from the front. As we continue, see how this economic strength supported everything else: the palace, the wars, the culture. The king and his minister worked together, each in his place, to make France shine. What comes to mind when you think of such teamwork? One person leading, another building the base. It feels steady, doesn't it? The story moves forward. Let us keep going gently.
Let us now turn to one of the most famous things Louis created, a place that became the symbol of his rule, the Grand Palace of Versailles. Work began in 1661, right around the time Louis took full control after Mazarin's death. He chose a spot southwest of Paris, a royal hunting lodge that had existed for years. It was quiet, surrounded by woods, far from the busy streets and memories of unrest in the capital. Louis wanted something much larger, something magnificent, a palace that would show the world the power and glory of France. He hired the finest architects, Louis Laveau to design the buildings, André Lenotte to create the gardens, and later Jules Ardouin-Monsart to expand it even more. What started as a small lodge grew into a vast complex with 3 main wings, thousands of rooms, and gardens that stretched for miles. The palace itself took about 20 years to reach its full form. The central part held the king's apartments, the hall of mirrors, grand salons, and chapels. The wings were for nobles, courtiers, and staff. Inside, everything was rich: gold leaf, marble, paintings, mirrors that reflected light like 1,000 suns. Outside, the gardens were a wonder, with fountains, statues, groves of trees, and paths laid out in perfect symmetry. Water features danced, flowers bloomed in patterns, and even a small zoo was added for the court's amusement. The whole place was meant to impress, to make visitors feel the king's greatness, and to keep the court under his watchful eye. Why did Louis build it? There were practical reasons. Paris had been dangerous for him as a boy, during the Fronde, when mobs filled the streets and nobles challenged the crown. He never forgot that fear. By moving the court to Versailles, far from the city, he created distance, safety, and control. Nobles who wanted favor had to live near him, attend his daily routines, ask permission to leave. It kept them busy, occupied, and loyal. The palace became a kind of gilded cage, beautiful, but one where the king was always at the center. But it was more than safety. Versailles was a statement. It showed Europe that France was the leading power, cultured, wealthy, refined. Rulers in other lands, from Austria to Russia, looked at it with envy and tried to copy it. The palace hosted banquets, ballets, operas, hunts, and ceremonies that made the French court the envy of the continent. Louis loved the arts, supported musicians, playwrights, painters, and architects.
Versailles was his stage, where he could shine as the Sun King and where France could feel proud. Of course, such grandeur came at a cost. Building it took huge sums of money, taxes from the people, labor from thousands of workers. Some died in the construction, from accidents or disease. The upkeep, with so many servants, cooks, gardeners, was endless. Critics, even in Louis's time, wondered if the money could have helped ordinary families more. Yet, for Louis, it was worth it. He saw the palace as a legacy, a sign of order, beauty, and strength after years of chaos. Looking back, Versailles stands as both triumph and warning. It brought culture to new heights, inspired generations, and gave France a lasting symbol. But it also showed how one man's vision, when carried too far, can strain a nation. It reminds us, gently, that beauty and power are wonderful, but they must be balanced with care for those who support them. Louis built something eternal, yet he also built a reminder that even kings must think of tomorrow. As we continue, picture this palace in your mind. The light in the mirrors, the sound of fountains, the king walking its halls. It was his home, his court, his statement to the world. What does it make you feel? Awe at the achievement, or quiet thought about its price? The story moves on. Let us keep going together.
Let us pause here for a moment and look at the heart of how Louis chose to rule, the idea that shaped everything he did after taking full control. He believed deeply in what we call royal absolutism, the thought that a king should hold all power in his hands, answerable only to God, not to nobles, not to parliaments, not to the people. This idea was not new. It had roots going back centuries. In ancient times, some rulers were seen as gods on earth, with subjects bowing low. In medieval Europe, kings had to share power with lords who gave loyalty, knights who fought, and assemblies that granted money. But by the 17th century, some thinkers and kings felt that strong central rule was needed to bring order after wars, rebellions, and division. Louis took this belief to its highest point and made it the center of his life. For him, the king was like the sun, giving light and life to the whole kingdom. Everything revolved around him. He once said, "L'État, c'est moi. I am the state." Whether he spoke those exact words or not, they captured his view perfectly. He saw no room for divided authority. Nobles might have titles, lands, and honors, but real decisions came from him alone. Parliaments, which in some countries could limit kings, were never called in France during his entire reign. Taxes, laws, war, peace, all flowed from the royal will. Ministers served at his pleasure and could be dismissed if they stepped out of line. This way of ruling had practical reasons. Louis had seen the Fronde, the chaos when nobles and crowds challenged the crown. He remembered how weak rule invited trouble, how his own childhood had been shaken by unrest. To him, absolutism was not just pride, it was protection. A strong king could keep peace inside the country, defend borders, build roads, support arts, and make France respected abroad. And in many ways it worked. The kingdom became more unified, administration cleaner, the army professional. France felt like one strong nation, not a collection of regions pulling in different directions. Yet, every philosophy has its shadows. When power rests in one person, the kingdom rises or falls with that person's wisdom, health, and fairness. Mistakes become larger because there are fewer voices to balance them.
Nobles felt pushed aside, some grew resentful, others flattered to stay close. Ordinary people, while safer from civil war, had less say in taxes or laws that touched their daily lives. Louis knew this, but he believed the good outweighed the risks. He trusted his judgment, guided by faith and by the lessons of his youth. Looking back, we can see both sides. Absolutism brought France to a peak of glory, cultural splendor, military strength, and pride. It inspired other rulers who looked to Versailles as a model. But it also planted seeds of future trouble when the system grew rigid, debts mounted, and people longed for more balance. It teaches us gently that no way of leading is perfect forever. Strong hands can guide through storms, but open hearts and shared wisdom often keep the peace longer. As we go forward, keep this belief in mind. It explains why Louis built Versailles, why he fought his wars, why he shaped France as he did. The king was not just a man on a throne, he was the center of everything, by choice and by conviction. What comes to your mind when you think of such complete authority? Does it feel like security or a heavy burden? The story deepens. Let us continue together with patience and care.